Well, overnight, Russian warships and a nuclear-powered submarine arrived in Cuba, 90 miles from Florida's coast. Someone called John F. Kennedy and seek his wisdom, if you can find him. Meanwhile, Senator Lindsey Graham this weekend finally told the truth and admitted the real reason we are sending billions of dollars to Ukraine and training and weapons. Listen.
Either we're going to help Ukraine or we're not. It's now time to give them the F-16s, let them fly the planes, long-range artillery to hit targets inside of Russia. They're sitting on $10 to $12 trillion of critical minerals in Ukraine. They could be the richest country in all of Europe. I don't want to give that money and those assets to Putin to share with China. If we help Ukraine now, they can become the best business partner we ever dreamed of. That $10 to $12 trillion of critical mineral assets could be used by Ukraine and the West, not given to Putin and China. This is a very big deal how Ukraine ends. Let's help them win a war we can't afford to lose. Let's find a solution to this war. But they're sitting on a gold mine to give Putin $10 or $12 trillion of critical minerals that he will share with China is ridiculous.
So, of course, it's not about the Ukrainian people at all. It never was about the Ukrainian people. It's about $10 trillion of resources. We don't care about the Ukrainians. It's about the minerals. It's about the resources that we plan to plunder and steal from them, of course. And Russia is getting in the way to our strategic plans there. So why are they playing with potential nuclear war over minerals and resources? Our next guest is holding a special emergency press conference this week in Washington, D.C. It's called "The Danger of Nuclear War is Real and It Must Be Stopped." That is former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter is going to be at that D.C. event, and he joins me now. Scott, great to see you.
Good to see you.
So we'll talk about the event in just a minute and get your perspective on that. But first, your response to Lindsey Graham this weekend, making a number of different statements. So Lindsey Graham admitting the truth. 600,000 Ukrainians, it's not really about them at all. It's about our ability to get our hands on $10 trillion of minerals and resources.
Well, Lindsey Graham's been around a long time, and he's old enough to remember that this has always been the American policy regarding post-Soviet Russia. The United States, from the moment the Soviet Union collapsed, viewed Russia as a landmass that was too big, had too much wealth, too much minerals, would make any emerging Russian state self-sufficient with the capability of not being totally subservient to the West. And it was always the policy objective of the United States to ensure that Russia could never again rise up and challenge the United States globally like the Soviet Union did. And so the policy of the United States was always to weaken Russia politically, economically, and geographically, to break Russia up into constituent parts so that you couldn't have a singular entity possessing all of this capability. So the Ukrainian conflict is an extension of this. You know, if you go back to the period of time before the Maidan revolution, the Maidan coup in 2014, when Viktor Yanukovych and even the presidents before that were desirous of joining the European Union. The reason why they didn't join the European Union is because in the post-Soviet era, in the 90s and afterwards, Ukraine had a special economic relationship with Russia. And this relationship allowed Ukraine to trade with Russia, to have industrial capabilities that continued to feed into the Russian system, similar to what had happened in the Soviet times when it was a singular economy. And if Ukraine joined the European Union, then Russia would have to put up a barrier because you can't allow an EU nation to exploit Ukraine to poach the Russian economy. So Russia told Ukraine, you have a choice. You can continue to have this great trading relationship with us, or you can join the European Union, have a great trading relationship with them. But you can't have both. And Ukraine made the decision that it was just too expensive for them to walk away. We couldn't accept that because even though Ukraine was an independent sovereign state, Russia continued to be able to access Ukrainian resources And we didn't want Russia to access those resources. We wanted those resources for ourselves. So one of the main reasons to strip Ukraine away from Russia was always about the resources. This is why Hunter Biden worked for Burisma, a energy exchange company. This is why American politicians have always had a unique attraction to Ukraine, because they could sit on boards, they could associate with companies that dealt with energy. This is about America siphoning the economic wealth of Ukraine away from Ukraine and away from Russia. Lindsey Graham has finally told the truth about what the American policy with Ukraine is all. It's never been about democracy. Ukraine's never been a democracy. It's never been about helping the Ukrainian people. We don't care about them. I've been saying this since day one. You can't claim to care about a people whom you allow their manhood to be slaughtered on the battlefield, allow their people to be dispersed. This is about Ukrainian resources. That's it. And Lindsey Graham is basically saying that he's willing to let Ukrainians die to the last Ukrainian so that America can gain access and control of Ukraine's mineral wealth.
How close are we to nuclear war? You're about to head to Washington, D.C. and headline this event down there, be one of the speakers as part of this big event, this press conference. And it seems like Russian President Putin has made it explicitly clear that all of this sort of training and all of these other HIMARS attacks and things are not okay. But once that crosses the line into cruise missiles, once ATACMS or Storm Shadows start coming across the border, it's game over. How close are we to that moment? And when people throw around the idea of nuclear war, are they just being hyperbolic, or are we there? Are we at this sort of Cuban Missile Crisis moment right now?
Well, we're past the Cuban Missile Crisis. What people don't understand with the Cuban Missile Crisis is that, yes, the Soviets put missiles into Cuba, but the confrontation was timed to the arrival of Soviet ships to a line that Kennedy had drawn in the Caribbean. And so we had this clock that was running down to that gave people a moment to look at, consider. Insanity prevailed on both sides. We don't have a line. We have a push of the button. We are one ATACMS launch away from general nuclear conflict with with Russia, meaning that the Ukrainians, who have ATACMS missiles now, if they attack the wrong target inside Russia, this could lead to a general nuclear war. And it's that. And so what I'm trying to tell the audience here is that for whatever reason, we have passed down to the Ukrainians the ability to start a general nuclear war. Until we take the ATACMS out of their control, until we take the Scalp missile, the Storm Shadow out of their control, we have pushed down to Ukraine the ability to create the conditions for a nuclear conflict. Now, fortunately, there's an adult in the room, and his name is Vladimir Putin. Every St. Petersburg International Economic Forum in recent history, Putin has said things that the world should listen to. And this one was no different. What he said is that Russia understands the insanity that the West is involved in. And so he has put in additional interim measures. He has created room for escalation management. For instance, he said, if you attack us with HIMARS or ATACMS, we may not go straight to nuclear war. We may choose to attack you using our precision weapons that we'll turn over to a third-party proxy just to keep this game of escalation going. Now, a lot of people heard that and went, oh, how provocative can he be? And I heard that and I said, thank God he just put an escalation control mechanism in place. And he also talked down. He said, yes, we have nuclear weapons. Yes, we have a doctrine. And yes, that doctrine can be implemented and will be implemented if need to be. But we're not there yet. He brought it down. He brought the temperature down, everything down. He's doing everything right to manage this. The question is, are we in the West listening? And are we going to respond in kind to de-escalate? And I'm afraid I'm not hearing that from the West right now. Maybe we can, but this is one of the reasons for this press conference, is to drive home the absolute imperative for the United States to take a leadership role in de-escalating the Ukrainian conflict.
I mean, it seems like at every turn, unless I'm wrong, it seems like at every turn they keep trying to call his bluff to see if he's actually telling the truth. And at every turn, they've been rebuffed. So now he's saying, I'm going to use third-party proxies, just like you guys are doing. It seems like a great idea. So I'm going to provide weapons to these third-party proxies. And do you want to test that? Do you want to see if we're being truthful? Do you want to see if I'm bluffing here? First of all, is he bluffing? And second of all, what particular third parties would the United States maybe want to provoke and try? Would it be Yemen? Would it be Syria? Where do you think these proxies would be located that we would want to test this out, this theory?
I mean, that's a Russian foreign policy, national security policy prerogative. But I'll say this: a Russian ship has arrived in a Cuban port. On board that ship are Zircon hypersonic missiles that are in range of the United States, and the United States has nothing that can shoot them down. There's also a Russian nuclear-powered cruise missile submarine in the same area. The weapons on board these two ships have the ability to take the East Coast off of the map of the United States. That's with, of course, nuclear weapons, but they're also precision-guided. How does it feel to be in the White House knowing that you're 12 minutes away from dying and there's nothing anybody can do to save you? The Secret Service can't get you out of the White House fast enough. And it's not a nuclear explosion. It's a Zircon missile that's going to come in and hit the White House. It can't be stopped. If the president's in the White House and the Russians decide to kill him, he's a dead man. Anybody in the United States on the East Coast is a dead man if the Russians decide to kill him. You see, that's what we have done to the Russians. We have them living under that. You know, every morning that Putin goes to work, he's 12 minutes away from dying if the United States or, Europe wanted to send precision-guided missiles into the Kremlin. And in the West, we seem to think that's okay. Well, guess what? Russia just flipped the script. And if the Russians are who I think they are, I'm imagining that there might be some cargo on these ships that stays behind in Cuba. And when these ships visit Venezuela, there's some cargo that'll stay behind in Venezuela, so that the United States will live in perpetual fear of Russian hypersonic missiles, conventionally armed. I don't think the Russians will deploy nuclear weapons into Cuba or Venezuela. Conventionally armed, they can't be stopped. There's nothing America could do to stop. And if the United States seeks to strike them, understand these weapons now will strike America. We've taken away, Russia is going to remove the ability of the United States to attack Venezuela, attack Cuba with no consequence. Again, it changes the entire paradigm of what we're doing here. So, and I think Yemen is
what leverage do we have anymore? I mean, this is right. We've lost all leverage. They're not using the U.S. dollar anymore. What leverage do they have? We're going to get, John F. Kennedy on the phone with Khrushchev. Can you please remove these missiles and we'll work out a deal? But there's no deal anymore, right?
Not right now. The Russians, again, I can't speak on their behalf. I can just say this as a student of Russian history. They do not want to live in a world that is in a perpetual state of chaos, a perpetual state of conflict. When Putin gave his address at the plenary at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, he started out not with the global geopolitical crisis. He started out with the economy. This is Russia's focus on strengthening the Russian economy, strengthening Russian economic ties with the majority of the nations in the world who are working with the Russians, preparing for the BRICS conference in October. This is the preference. And Russia has always said that they're willing to sit down with a genuine negotiating partner and come up with an arrangement that de-escalates. What Russia's doing now is putting chips on the table. You see, in the past, the United States said, well, we won't allow you to talk about this. We won't allow you to talk about that. Like, you can't talk about nuclear capable aircraft on an aircraft carrier when you talk about nuclear weapons. It was like, why? It's a nuclear weapon on an aircraft carrier. No, you're not allowed to talk about that. You can't talk about